All right. So welcome, everyone. Welcome back to our final reading of Goethe's Faust, Part 2. I want to again say that this is a real accomplishment for those of you who have stuck with the reading. It's a long, drawn out ordeal, but it's hugely rewarding. At least it has been for me. I hope it has been for you as well. So I want to, again, just following our typical format, I want to take a few moments to go over the high points of what's happening, and then maybe open up the discussion to you and see what you got out of it. And then maybe we can zoom into several texts that I think are just so profound and pregnant with meaning that they deserve some line by line attention. So as you remember, we left off last time with Faust getting his final wish from Mephistopheles, which is to have this experiment with taming the ocean. They got the emperor to bequeath some land near the shoreline, and now we're continuing with this enterprise. But first we have this interesting introduction of new characters, Philemon and Baucis. They are interesting in a lot of different ways. They come from Greek mythology, Greco-Roman mythology. They're mentioned in Ovid as this couple, a God-fearing couple that they're like an example of hospitality, essentially. So there's a story there where I think it's Zeus and Hermes that visit them, and they are, disguised, and Philemon and Baucis are the only ones in town that give them a place to stay and feed them and so on, and they're rewarded for that. That story serves as the backbone for what's happening, for how Goethe uses it, of course, with a twist. And the twist is, instead of being rewarded for their piety, for their consistency, for their sort of devotion to traditional lifestyle and values and so on, they're actually destroyed because they come face to face with Faust's lust for this unlimited expansion and technology and so on. So this is again just a really interesting twist towards the end of the book. We have these new characters, and they're really tragic characters, but they really underline some of the tension in the book. The next scene, of course, is the scene of the success, of Faust's enterprise, and it is shown through this flotilla of ships that are returning from their exploits. They're using this newly cultivated land as their essentially their port, and they're able to go out to sea and secure all kinds of riches through either trading, piracy, a mix of both. Of course, Mephistopheles is heading that side of things, that side of the business, and things are going well. But Faust is not satisfied, and he's not satisfied because he doesn't have control over the entire shoreline. Philemon and Baucis are like sticking out like a sore thumb with their church bells and their traditional lifestyle. They're not really interested in participating in this new economy, this new experience that Faust wants to proliferate through that new region. And so what is the solution? Well, the solution is typically a conflict, and this is what we have. And of course, Faust, again, following his typical fashion, he doesn't get himself dirty, but he dispatches Mephistopheles as his sort of not ambassador, I guess, the executor of his wishes. And obviously the end is predictable, right? Philemon and Bacchus are destroyed in a fire. Supposedly, it's all accidental, but it's pretty clear what's happening. I mean, it's the same kind of plot, same kind of action as we saw already in the beginning, in part one rather, with Gretchen. Everybody dies, right? even maybe unnecessarily so. But I think it's a great there's a great lesson here that Goethe is trying to accent in a sense that there's always a cost. There's always cost in human suffering whenever you try to do this type of expansion, this unlimited quest for some supposed good. And Philemon and Bacchus, they really represent that that human toll that is, it's tragic. What happens to them? They perish, their house is destroyed, the church is destroyed, everything is basically destroyed. Now, Faust's reaction to all of that, of course, he's ecstatic. He doesn't, he pretends that he didn't really mean to hurt anybody, but that's up to, for us to maybe interpret and decide whether he really cares or not. But the bottom line is he is pretty happy about how it's turning out. And then we have this another interlude where he meets the three ladies that represent want, need, care, and death. The one that stays with him is care, and there's an interesting dialogue that follows that. And then, of course, is the final scene where Faust looks on the progress that he's making. He makes his classical pronouncement, "Stop moment, you're so fair," and he dies. In that scene, we have interesting creatures introduced to us, the lemurs, which are initially, when I was reading this, I first thought it was kind of like monkeys, but it's not monkeys. It's actually the lemur. The name comes from Roman mythology, and these are actually spirits of the dead in Roman mythology. And then when the monkeys were discovered, they were given that name because they were nocturnal creatures, and so the name had stuck. But it's actually coming from the Roman mythology and kind of the spirits of the underworld that haven't been buried. Actually, that's another interesting point. Typically, these spirits have not been buried, and that is why they're sort of restless and traveling the earth essentially, and disturbing the peace. Let's put it this way. So these lemurs are digging trenches supposedly, but we already see that they're actually digging a grave for Faust, and that's the scene. So as soon as Faust makes a pronouncement, he loses his wager with Mephistopheles. He falls down dead. Mephistopheles is celebrating his victory, perhaps a little too prematurely, and then we see another interesting sort of detail. He summons the mouth of hell. That's an interesting picture. I wanted to share a couple of images that I found on Wikipedia of the mouth of hell. This metaphor for hell is very well established. Let me see if I can do this real quick. 1 second. About this hellmouth. Okay.
Phil, can you take a look in chat, please?
Yes, 1 second. Chat. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Okay. So let's look at some of these. Can you see my screen?
Ooh.
Yeah, so there's one. So there's a hellmouth right there. Here's another one that I think I like this even better. This is from cathedral in Nuremberg, where you see this lion type creature devouring the sinners as they're plunged into its mouth. So quite graphic, and of course it makes it much more dramatic as we are sort of anticipating Faust descending into hell. But of course, that's not what happens. Let me do one more. I think this one is also my favorite. I think with the devil here standing in chains, and you can see all the sinners in the mouth of hell. So anyway, I thought I'd share this as a just to enliven the conversation a little bit. So anyway. As Mephistopheles is getting ready to celebrate victory and the capture of Faust's soul, we have the angels appearing on the scene, sort of ambushing him in a way. And lo and behold, they snatch away Faust's immortal soul. We'll get to some of the detail around that, but it is, again, another twist and turn in the plot. I don't know what you expected. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on this, whether you think it's deserved that Faust is saved, or whether he should have perished with the rest of the sinners. But definitely another twist in this tragedy of Dr. Faustus. And then we have, the Mephistopheles obviously is complaining, but not much he can do about this. And then we're done with Mephistopheles, and the scene switches to the final scene is in heaven, and we are now in the presence of various saints and in the presence of penitent sinners who are doing several things. They are obviously praising God and singing hymns, and I guess expressing some of the wonder of contemplating the divine. These scenes are very much reminiscent of Dante, especially Paradiso, towards the end. As if you've read Dante, you remember that we have the vision, the beatific vision of the Godhead, and just right before that, we see Mary as the focal point of all praise and worship in heaven. And the same thing here. Mary appears; she is the Mater Gloriosa. And we have other penitent women who are ascribing praise to her, but also expressing or interceding rather for Gretchen, who is also in that crowd. And Gretchen herself is interceding for Faust. And so it seems that Faust, sort of the mode of Faust's salvation is through Gretchen. She is ultimately the one that saves him. There's also some indication that it is due to his life of striving for perfection, of striving to reach some sort of ideal, and so on. We'll get into that in just a minute. I just wanted to go over the high points, but that's the content of this last part, which ends with a very curious expression or lines about the eternal feminine. I read Faust before, and I didn't really pay much attention to that, but this time around, it really struck me that this is how Goethe wants to end the entire book, with that particular term, the eternal feminine. It really struck me because, however you end it, that's what's going to stay with you, and the fact that he underlines that and brings it to to this sort of focal point is really really amazing. So anyway, with that, I'll turn it over to you to comment and see what you got out of it, and then maybe we can just do some line-by-line reading and discussion of some of the more profound sections in this in this part of the reading, because I think there are a lot of really interesting passages that deserve to be analyzed, with more care and detail. So anyway, type in exclamation point. Since there's only a few of us here, you can raise your hand, whatever works for you. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. And yeah, if you have any thoughts that you want to share, please go ahead. Anyone? Dimitri, go ahead. You're on mute. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a lot of stuff there, but what I found especially striking is that the irony of the beautiful moment, how ironic it is. You know, Faust, who wants to be released from striving, ends up glorifying striving, because that's basically the beautiful moment. He sees the beautiful moment is this vision of striving people living dangerously, you know. So he
Mhm.
glorifies striving at that, even though he wanted to be released from it. So that's kind of ironic. I find it very ironic. I also have some pity for the devil and for Mephistopheles, you know. He's like he at least has a sense of humor. Faust doesn't have any sense of humor. And he has some humor, and not only that, he gets deprived of his part of the bargain, you know, pretty seriously. That's what he bargained for. And you feel some pity for the guy, you know. I don't have much sympathy for Faust. I think he's like, I mean, he's a tragic figure, but for some
Mhm.
reason, you know, the people he destroys during his sojourn with the devil, there are so many innocent people, Gretchen, that pay on the shore, I forget their names, but he destroys a lot of people and he gets away with it, basically.
Yep. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, that's totally agree with that. With that sentiment. Yeah. Anyone else who wants to add to that or contradict that? Yeah, these lines, if there are no other, if there's no feedback, we can turn to these lines and look at them in more detail in a second. I guess going back over the content, I'm curious, in your mind, what is the significance, I guess, of Philemon and Bacchus? Is it just this idea of kind of a medieval mindset that is essentially mown over by the modern world? Is that what they represent? And what place does religion place in that? I mean, there's obviously some emphasis on religion because of the church bells. If you remember in the beginning, the church bells were kind of Faust's salvation, right? They saved him in a way from committing suicide. The Easter bells, and now he is irritated, and it's this thing that causes him to go to extreme measures to get rid of them. Madeline, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the overview, Phil. So Baucis and Philemon is one of the most beautiful stories in Ovid's Metamorphoses. And it's one of the very few, maybe only two love stories in there that truly works out, you know, where they're really living happily ever after. And these two are the model of people living in contented poverty, happily serving each other. Both are master and both are servant. And they're contented in their old age. They're contented with what they have. And when the two gods come along, they don't know that they're gods. And it's interesting that this is in a section, I guess, where Goethe brings together the Greek, the Southern mythology, with the Northern at the end, the Christianity. Well, I guess Christianity is not especially Northern compared to that, but in the sense we've been discussing it. It's just incredibly beautiful to read. They bring out food. The food is described in detail. Their humble home. They spread the cloth on the table. You know, they have the olives. They just do everything for these two complete strangers. And the strangers say, you know, what is it you would like? And basically what happens is that their land had been a swamp, and they'd been living in a hut, like a hovel, and the swampland is transformed into higher ground, and their hut is transformed into like a marble temple. So just for their hospitality to strangers, not knowing that that the people who they encounter are gods, basically, they're richly rewarded in this world. And I thought it was very interesting how Faust completely perverted that. He just looks at it like a land developer. Like, I want these people's land and they're in my way, and it's just bugging me that there is something that I don't own. And I want to own this too. I think that it's, I don't think that the sounds and everything coming from their land are the thing that's really bothering him, the church bells.
Mhm.
I don't think that he absolutely has to have that particular view. I think it's just that there's something that he doesn't own, and he wants that. So he's still in his major greed mode. And it's a bit baffling why he is shown mercy and taken up to heaven. But maybe that's the point of that. Except that at the end, he does say, I've achieved happiness in my industry in the world. I have free men doing free labor, although that is all questionable, considering that he has just told Mephistopheles, or maybe some of the other people, go out and collect a bunch of people to do this work. I don't care how you get them, whether it's promises or threats. But anyway, he's happy. He feels like I've mastered everything in the world and I have power, and suddenly he dies. And then in his death, there's really a lot of Dante in here. Once again, I think that Gretchen becomes Beatrice in a way.
Yep.
She's going ahead of him in heaven. She's interceding for him. But instead of as in Dante, where he's going to see God, here he's going to see the goddess. And all those images that were earlier in the book of the three women, which is a big theme from ancient Greece, the Graeae and all these other people. There was the oracle at Delphi, which was the navel of the world. It was a female oracle, and it was on a tripod. And so all those scenes in the underworld that we saw, where there was like this tripod cauldron and the three women and everything, those were very symbolic of the ancient Greek wisdom. And so I'm still going with the theme of, this is Goethe's big reunion with his anima figure. Whether it is the one of ancient Greece, or whether it's the newer one of Mary, that this is a way of uniting himself with his inner soul, with his divine feminine side.
Yeah, I totally agree, Madeline, with your analysis in terms of Beatrice and Gretchen being counterparts. I actually had the same exact feeling, and I looked at the interpretive notes, and I think that's the sort of the consensus opinion on that, is that in this last part, Goethe is definitely mirroring almost Dante's ending, which again is super interesting, because for the entirety of the play, we've been sort of secular in our outlook. I mean, there have been some witchcraft and some magic, but really religion has been on the sidelines, if anything. And yet the way we finish is everything, everything about this world is illusory, and at least that's how it's presented. And there's some particular lines that I'm alluding to that maybe we'll get to look at. But it seems like the focus has shifted completely to the sort of religious Christian, specifically, outlook as really the answer to all of Faust's striving. And we have some really profound lines there talking about how it is so from various standpoints. So that is super interesting to me. Just again, this sudden turn to Dante's worldview, which is again a medieval worldview, and we are supposed to be in the Faustian modern world, and somehow it seems that Goethe is maybe saying that this modern worldview, this modern philosophy, is not enough, and it doesn't really work as a foundation of it for anything, for lasting satisfaction, for meaning, for whatever Faust is searching for. So that's an open question. Again, I'm very curious as to what you guys think about this. Let's see if there's any other things that I want to mention before jumping into actual details. What did you think about Dr. Marianus? He is an interesting figure too. Any thoughts on what he might represent or not? And also, I guess the other interesting question or theme is the inclusion of the blessed boys, the choir of the blessed boys, which are essentially these infants who die at birth, and they have not sinned, and therefore they're sent directly to heaven. It's interesting to me that they are brought into this mix as another sort of voice of the chorus. So curious if you have any thoughts. Anybody has any thoughts on these characters? I find them, again, it's just whatever is surprising and unanticipated. I always kind of perk up when I see these characters that are kind of coming out of nowhere seemingly, and they're interesting. They're just like, well, why include them? What is their role in all of this? So just some open-ended questions here that we might want to discuss. Katie, Mike, feel free to join the conversation if you have any thoughts or you want to add anything. Since we have such a small group, welcome any contribution from everybody. Just don't want to dominate the discussion completely. So if you guys have any thoughts or questions, or just feel free to type in exclamation point, share your thoughts, etc. If nobody else has any specific comments, maybe we can go turn to the most famous passage, which is the passage when Faust makes his final pronouncement and dies, and just look at some of those lines and try to analyze them and go ahead, Mike. Mike, you're on mute, so keep in mind. Mike, you're muted. If you can unmute yourself, Mike, we can't hear you. Unmute is blocked. Let's see, should not be blocked. It wasn't initially blocked, but it should be unblocked now, because as you can see, Madeline and Dimitri can do it. Can you maybe, Mike, can you try to disconnect and then connect again to the meeting? Maybe that will help. We're having some issues here. Yeah, Katie, you were just able to unmute yourself, right?
Yeah, it was stuck for a second. Mind a minute.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, Mike, you should be able to unmute yourself. It looks like everyone else is able to. Well, anyway, while you're trying, maybe again, if you're having trouble, maybe just disconnect and connect. And then hopefully that might solve it. Dimitri, go ahead.
Yes, you wanted to read that passage, that very, very important passage.
If you want to, yeah, go
I
ahead.
can read it from my translation. This is the highest wisdom that I own, the best that mankind ever knew. Freedom and life are earned by those alone who conquer them each day anew. Surrounded by such danger, each one thrives. Childhood, manhood, and age lead active lives. At such a throng I would fain stare. With free men on free ground their freedom share. And then to the moment I might say, abide, you're so fair. The traces of my earthly day no eons can impair. As I presage a happiness so high, I now enjoy the highest moment. And that is the whole irony of it, that the whole point of the wager was to be released from striving. And here he glorifies striving. He says that those striving people, it's just beautiful, so beautiful. They're striving. It's just the beautiful moment. That's what how it appears to me, and and besides that, what struck me is very kind of interesting, is which is not necessarily related to this passage. Oh, by the way, in this passage, it says childhood, manhood, and age lead active lives. So remember, in part one, he said that activity makes a man. So here again, he says that activity is paramount. So that's what struck me. This is my edition. I don't know, maybe you have something different.
Yeah, let me read it in another translation. They're all a little bit differently. They're all saying the same thing.
Yes,
I also looked at the German original because oh, Mike, go ahead. Looks like you're unmuted, so. Let's give him a second. Mike, go ahead if you can hear us. There he is. Okay, there's the video. Go ahead, Mike.
I put my comment in the chat. I don't know if you saw it, about the utility of life. That everybody, even Faust, dies, and life is impermanent and transient, and everything is impermanent and transient, and there's a limitation of all of human existence, unless you're Mephistopheles or God. That's, I don't know if that fits your paradigm, but that's what I got out of it.
Well, yeah, it's super interesting because obviously Faust thinks he found the one thing he was looking for. He dies, and then immediately after we have Mephistopheles' viewpoint of where things stand. And of course, Mephistopheles contradicts Faust entirely. And he says, this guy, he latched on to this empty, void moment. In German, the word for moment is Augenblick. If you look through the entire tragedy, Augenblick is all over the place. It's all about these moments that are critical in the play. And Faust is looking for this moment. The word actually, it's a very interesting word, Augenblick. The root word there's blick, which is kind of like a glimpse or a view. And when we get to heaven, that same word is used to say, look up at the Savior, and that's how you're saved, is by looking at the Godhead, a divinity. So the glimpse that saves you, that moment of looking up at divinity, that's what Faust has been missing. And I mean, you can interpret it like that, I guess. But the other part is the moment that he thought was the highest Mephistopheles describes as empty, devoid of meaning, and essentially nothing. And as he tried to latch onto it, he loses his wager, he dies. But I do appreciate Dimitri's point about the moment that is the highest is the moment where he praises people striving. I don't think it's his own striving, but he does praise these free people on free land, and they're making their own life, and he made it possible. So he is celebrating his own accomplishment in giving others this ability to function independently using their own means of sustenance. The part that was more ironic to me, though, personally, besides the striving part, is the fact that his prescription for others is the prescription he won't take himself. If you remember back in part 1, when Faust wanted to get rejuvenated, Mephistopheles told him, well, one way to do it, you go to a farm and live that life, a simple life of farming and, living in concert with nature and all of that. And Faust said, no, there's no way I'm doing that. That's too boring. That's too monotonous. That's, I don't want to be limited. That was the main point. He doesn't want to be limited to that kind of existence, but he's happy to limit other people to that existence. And he's happy to pronounce them as happy without really asking them what they want. So I just thought it was such an ironic, interesting parallel with I guess, you can't really exclude politics from this completely because, Aristotle talks about happiness and politics. He makes the connection between the two because individual happiness ultimately is what drives how we think of society, right? Individual happiness, depending on what we think of happiness, that's going to drive how we want to structure society. So it becomes a political thing eventually. And it's interesting to me that you have this disconnect. You have Faust, who wants to be this grand chess master and move every piece around, move other people's lives, right? He thinks he has the right to remove people from land, even command their destruction, all for some ideal that he himself is not willing to take. And that to me was the most ironic thing, is that he does not want to stay on a free land by the ocean and till the soil for the rest of his days. His idea is to be the grand master. So there's that inherent contradiction in the aims and his description of it. The other part that I thought was somewhat ironic is the fact that he doesn't witness it yet. He's saying, in anticipation of all of this, I witnessed the crowning moment. So he doesn't actually see it. And Madeline made the point that we don't know how these people are paid or if they're actually happy that they're doing all of this, digging trenches there and trying to conquer the ocean and whatnot. We don't know anything from their perspective. All we know is some people that didn't want to go with that program are destroyed. So that's the evidence that we do have. And I just find there's just so much meaningful commentary on the modern world and how politics works and how we have all these prescriptions from people that are not willing to, eat their own dog food, if you will. Anyway, so that was definitely something that struck me as ironic, and I'm curious if you picked up on it or if you think I'm reading too much into this. Okay, so the other thing that I thought was very interesting is this expression about free people on free land. And in different translations, it's rendered differently, but basically the idea is they're surrounded by danger. So there's something very romantic, kind of a romantic ideal, again, very much George Byron-like ideal of striving, earning their life and their freedom by their sort of efforts, standing strong and proud on their own land. It's very nationalistic in some ways, very much connected to the earth, right? The earth and nationalism play a big role in all of this. And I thought it was very Nietzsche-like, Nietzschean, to describe this sort of ultimate utopia of society you have these strong, free people, children, men, and old men, and then the old men, right? So from all ages, almost kind of like I was thinking of what's that in Hitler's time, there was these boys that were part of the military towards the end of the war, when they didn't have enough soldiers from the regular conscription. They opened who, sorry?
Hitlerjugend.
Yes, thank you, Mike. That's the word I was. Hitlerjugend, exactly. So you almost, I mean, obviously Goethe didn't know anything about this, but still, in my mind, when he talks about children, young boys and men and old men, they're all standing strong and striving for their freedom on free land. It sounds very noble. Unfortunately, it's an ideal that may be unworkable for everybody. But Goethe, again, he puts it in as a line in Faust's monologue, and I think it's very profound in some ways to think about these prevalent philosophies as they emerged in the 1820s, 1830s. They were then picked up by Nietzsche, picked up by others, turned into nationalism, turned into some pretty bad things. Now, I think Goethe, though, it's amazing that he has the foresight to give us a taste of things going bad with the story of Philemon and Baucis. Here are these people who are moral people that are happy to live in a sort of limited world, a limited life. The only thing that they want is to be left alone, essentially. That's their wish. They want to have. So they are the free people on a free land, but apparently they're not the version that Faust wants. And so Faust has to kill them in order to achieve his ideal. I mean, there's just so much irony here and so much foresight that Goethe, I feel like it's just amazing. And I think part of it is because Goethe himself was in politics. He was the right-hand man for this Archduke at a certain point in his life. So he knows firsthand how these things tend to work out. And we've had many, many instances of kind of these stories about running the empire. And of course, we've seen inflation, and we've seen all kinds of things that can go awry in trying to run other people's lives and sort of bypassing the morals, essentially, any kind of limitations. Madeline, go ahead.
Yes, perhaps someone can explain to me why Faust is going to heaven. At this moment in time, Faust, he's been a shit most of the way through. He's been self-centered. He's treated Gretchen horribly. He doesn't have many redeeming qualities except for that kind of restless spirit, curiosity, and desire to be transformed and transcend. And in his quest for that, he does a lot of harm. He acknowledges the harm he's done, like when he and his father went around practicing medicine during a plague. But that was sort of before the story started. During the course of the story, he's been really awful in many ways. He's pretended to be powerful. He's tricked an emperor, which means that he's basically wrecked an economy. People have truly been harmed because of his actions. Real people have died, have lost their lives, they've lost their lands, they've lost their loved ones. So now he said, oh, I want to conquer the ocean. I want to do this. I want to do that. I've got all that. Oh, good. Now I can die happy because I bulldozed this sweet old couple's final dwelling place. Why doesn't Mephistopheles get his soul? Why is he suddenly going up to Gretchen? And why is she all like, oh, darling, darling, you're finally here?
Well, yeah, Madeline, I don't know if I can traverse the mysteries of a woman's heart for you. But I at least
I can tell you, Phil, that there are a few women who would at that point would view his entire life and think, oh, great, here he comes again.
well, there's no accounting for taste, is there? um, but we
Sorry,
can,
but why is he even going to heaven? Why
right.
is
But
he even
that's
there?
a absolutely fair question, and in my mind, I'm right there with you. I personally, after having seen all of this, I really don't see how he could end up there. But we can definitely see what is presented to us as a possible solution. Oh, Mike, go ahead. Do you have a thought about this?
Well, I read this a while back, and so I don't remember exactly even how he died. But I got my recollection is uh, uh, it's Gabriel, the angel Gabriel interceded on his behalf because he had achieved spiritual redemption by both arguing with Mephistopheles and and how he killed some of these people in supposedly a somewhat loving way. He wasn't quite into his selling his soul to the devil completely. And so the angel Gabriel gave him a pass, and it surprised Mephistopheles as much. I mean, it surprised Faust as much as it surprised us.
Right. Well, perhaps. Let me read you a line from this is the part that says in mountain gorges, forest, cliffs, and wilderness. This is where we have the angelic choruses, and we meet the Pater Ecstaticus, Pater Profundus, and Pater Seraphicus. And in there, there's the following line. It's around 11,935 if you have the line numbers in your book. But basically, this is the line where it says, angels floating in the high atmosphere bearing Faust's immortal essence. And it says the following: pure spirits peer, from evil coil he was vouchsafed exemption. Whoever strives in ceaseless toil, him we may grant redemption. So the ceaseless toil and the striving seems to be reason number one. The reason number two is right after that. And when on high transfigured love has added intercession, the blessed will throng to him above with welcoming compassion. So the second part of this is the intercession by Gretchen. So the two reasons he is in heaven is number one, because of his striving, and that echoes the very the opening parts of the book where God says, as long as man strives, he will err, but as long as he keeps striving, that somehow gives him this redeeming quality. If he stops striving, then that's the problem. We can't help him. But if he keeps striving, it's like unfinished product. And if we can keep working and keep working, and of course another metaphor there is the gardener who can keep snipping away at a bush, hoping to make it bear fruit. Right, that's the idea also from the metaphor from New Testament, where you have this idea of a gardener and branches, and the gardener snipping off branches, trying to make something, a tree bear fruit. So that's part number one. The second part is this idea of redemption of sinners. So who do we have in this angelic chorus? Well, we have penitent women, all of whom are sinners. Now, they've all done bad things, such as the Magna Peccatrix, the woman who was apparently a prostitute, but then she washes Jesus's feet and she repents and she's forgiven. And then we have, again, Samaritan woman who had 5 husbands, which was, again, an adultery, essentially, according to the Jewish law. But then again, she repents and she is saved. Thirdly, we have this Maria Aegyptica, who is a saint, who supposedly also was living a very adulterous life, and then she repented, and then she lived happily ever after. So all of these three examples basically are saying that it's okay to be to have imperfections and be sinful and so on, as long as you repent and are forgiven. And then Faust apparently fits that same mold. Plus, he gets the intercession from Gretchen. So that, to me, is at least how Goethe presents the reasoning. Whether or not we agree with that is a different story. But in my mind, that's at least the kind of the official line. Madeline, go ahead.
Well, as long as Doug isn't here, I'm going to get into some psychologizing about Goethe, which is, so first of all, does anyone remember the child that he had with Gretchen? Was that a boy?
I'm not sure. Does it say?
I'm looking at it. I can't find it. What I'm thinking is that this is wish fulfillment on Goethe's part. In his life, there may have been some infant boys who did not survive, who were his, and he's now reunited with them. And in this sort of swirling, this kind of spiraling, ascending dance, which does echo Dante's journeys through his whole world, through the Commedia. It also echoes all those spiraling dances earlier in the book with the women, with the witches, different women, the pubs, the Grecian women, all these different women are in spiraling dances. So I think that this is kind of wish fulfillment on Goethe's part. He may be reunited with sons that he never knew, that may or may not have been alive when he was writing this, and also to be forgiven by a woman who he had greatly wronged, it seems to me.
Okay, well, that's certainly an interesting hypothesis. I mean, you might be absolutely correct in that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's interesting. Certainly makes sense from that standpoint. Yeah, I mean, Goethe was there's some similarity between him and Faust in a lot of ways, actually. So I would, yeah, I think that might be interesting to explore that. Dmitry, go ahead. Are you muted?
So I wanted to pick up on that point between similarity between Goethe and Faust.
Mm-hmm.
You see, what kind of tragedy happened to Faust? Nothing happened to him, nothing tragic during the whole story. Did anything tragic happen to him? Not really. I mean, a lot of tragedy happened to Gretchen or to minor character, to Baucis and Philemon, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing happened tragic to Faust. And if you look at Goethe, at his life, in his youth, he was a rebel. He was rebellious. But then he turned into a very upright servant of the state.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there is nothing much tragic about him as a person, as a personality. He's not a real tragedian, you know. So it's not surprising. He's kind of conciliatory, you know. He's not there's not, you know what I mean? He's not a tragic person like Goethe by himself, you know. And he infuses that kind of lack of tragedy into Faust, with whom nothing bad happens, and he ends up in heaven, you know. Although, and all the innocent characters like Gretchen and Baucis and Philemon, they who undergo real tragedies, something really bad happens to them, and you know, and Gretchen also ends up in heaven, you know. Everybody ends up in everybody's happy, you know. It ends on a happy note.
Yeah.
But why is I think it's a character of Goethe, you know. It's part of his character. He's not a really tragic character.
See, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying he's mimicking the history of his own life, the story of his own life. It's expressed.
Yes. That's exactly what I'm saying. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense too.
That's my perspective on it, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, interesting. I'm just thinking that through myself right now. Yeah. Mike, did you want to say something else? You had your hand raised, I noticed.
No, that was a leftover hand raise.
Oh, okay, leftover hand, okay. No problem. Okay, so the other, right, so the other part of this that's interesting, just following Faust's grand pronouncement, "Stop the moment, you're so fair." Then, he falls down dead. The next thing that we have is the commentary from Mephistopheles, and I want to read that. Mephistopheles: "No joy could sate him, no delight but cloyed. For changing shapes he lusted to the last. The final moment, worthless, stale, and void, the luckless creature, he would hold it fast. Here he who fought me off so well, time triumphs, stranded lies a whitened shell. The clock is muted." And I think the original says the clock is still, it's stopped. It's just even more dramatic. So you have the clock and it just, that's it. The hand is stops and the moment is gone. So he characterizes Faust's highest moment as worthless, stale, and void. And it's an interesting commentary from him. He has, we've seen Mephistopheles, sometimes he has these insights that contradict Faust's, and he presumably, Mephistopheles has an additional perspective on things that Faust maybe is more idealistic. Mephistopheles is more pragmatic, more cynical about things, and in his mind, this utopia that Faust painted for himself is a chimera. It's not real, and therefore it's nothing. And for that nothingness, he lost his bet, which is to him probably also quite ironic that all the different simple joys that could not satisfy him, and yet he was satisfied by something abstract that was a pure figment of his own imagination, really. Dmitry, go ahead.
I wanted to add to that utopia that Faust built.
Mhm.
I think one point that I disagree. Somebody made a comment that he's not part of it, but he wants to share their freedom. It says these free men on free ground, their freedom share. So he wants. So at some sense, he wants to be part of that striving. He wants to share that freedom. He wants to share that activity. He doesn't want to just be a passive observer who observes other people striving. He wants to share it. He wants to be part of it.
Right. Well,
somebody made the point that he didn't. He just wanted to observe it. I don't think so. I think he wanted to share it. So that is my translation. That is, it's a share. He wants to share it. Share their
which let's see.
line. What is the line? Line 11,580.
Yep, I see it.
Do you see it? Share. He wants to share, be part of it.
Yeah, I don't see sharing here in my translation.
In my, what does it say in your translation?
It just says, "On acres free among free people stand." Let me just read the just a couple lines before that.
Yes.
So let's see. "Such teeming would I see upon this land. On acres free among free people stand."
Stand.
So maybe that is right. Maybe that is right. So basically, he's saying that he would like to stand with them on that freedom.
Yes.
Okay. Fair point.
So that is just what.
Yeah. I don't know that I would trust necessarily his pronouncements there, to be honest. but okay, fair point. Yeah, he wants to participate in that as well. Madeline, go ahead.
Yeah, that was a good point, Dmitry. Thanks. I wanted to bring up that scene, that truly beautiful scene with all those red rose petals drifting down around Mephistopheles. I mean, it's very striking. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I'm assuming that those are supposed to represent, the blood and the wounds and the mercy of Christ. And how that grace is coming down all around. And his response is to say, oh, come on, angels, just take a slightly sexier form. Seduce me. I want to seduce you. Why won't you do this? So that he takes even the most ethereal beauty, which is also a very sensual beauty, the red rose petals, and once again wants to make it something part of the world of the passions, or the of the senses, the world of the flesh, rather than to take it for what it is, which is this like miracle from heaven. And then he is disgusted by the rose petals. They're all like disgusting and slimy.
Interesting. Yeah, I thought it was also again so surprising in some ways, his reaction to the angels, where he wants them to seduce him somehow, like you said, and it was almost bordering on kind of caricature, when he's telling them to take off like clothes or something like that. And I mean, it's just the part that I thought was interesting there was that apparently there's something so attractive about these heavenly creatures that his only response to that could be from some sort of sensual nature. But maybe again, that's just another example of where you have true beauty and true love, and then a creature like Mephistopheles is just not capable of responding to that in any other way. Whereas the proper response is more spiritual or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, I thought it was also very very unusual, to put it again, unexpected reaction like that, because you have, the last thing you're thinking of in kind of that setting, right, from with angels singing, is something erotic. I mean, it's just not it seems out of place. But of course with Mephistopheles, you can never rule anything out. Dmitry, do you want to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you see, what I found especially amusing is the struggle for Faust's soul, between devils and angels. It was unbelievable. I mean, as you're reading this, you're thinking, who's gonna like it belongs to the devil, his soul. And that was the whole point. Why is the devil wronged? Something tragic happens to the devil. Why should nothing tragic happen to Faust and something tragic happen to the devil? That I don't understand.
Yeah, I also felt that it was a little bit unfair.
Unfair to the,
But then again, the whole idea of Christian idea of redemption, it's not about fairness, because the idea being that fair, if everybody got what they deserved, then heaven would be pretty empty. The idea is you have this redemption, which again is a huge thing. I mean, read Dostoevsky, right? We keep going back to him. I mean, he's all about these people who are these grand sinners who eventually find redemption. I mean, we were just talking about Crime and Punishment before the meeting started. There you go. Raskolnikov, is the perfect example. A murderer who finds redemption. And that idea is kind of essential to the idea of religion. And probably it makes a lot of sense from a social perspective, because you can't have, society has to have some way to rehabilitate people from their guilt. And everybody has something that they're guilty of. And so that actually makes, from again, purely kind of utilitarian standpoint, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and also that faith saves, right? So what is the idea of redemption? It's all based on faith, whether you believe or not. If you really believe, then you will be saved. And what does Faust believe in? In striving. And then they say, he who strives with all his power, we are allowed to save. So that's the idea of redemption. Striving is his faith. That is his faith. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Look, I think you're right. I think that's the faith of the Faustian man.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly. By striving, we reach perfection, and that's actually, that's kind of God's view, right? As we were presented, in the beginning, right? God, we have the view in heaven where we started, and this is echoing that, right? We're kind of at the end now, so we have to look back towards the beginning to compare where we started and where we are now. So in the beginning, God is pretty explicit about man is going to err as long as he strives. That's the line. And the implication there is, if he is striving, he is improving. He is improving. He's going to always err. Now, the question I have, and I think in my mind the answer is clear, but the question I have for you is, have we actually seen any improvement? I think who was it last time that was bringing that up? I don't remember the name, but anyway, that to me is unclear whether we've seen any improvement whatsoever. Maybe there's an improvement in terms of his desires are not so self-centered. He's thinking about kind of society at large. But my problem with that is, if you haven't really repented and changed your ways on a personal level, the same kind of mistakes you've made in your interpersonal dealings, you're going to make them on a huger scale. You know, it's going to be the same problem, only now magnified by 1,000 or 1,000,000, because now you're doing the same thing to millions of people instead of just one person. So you're not screwing one person only, you're screwing thousands of people. So that's my kind of cynical maybe take on his progress or lack thereof. I don't really see a lot of progress in him, to be honest.
I don't think he has improved at all. You look what happened to Gretchen. He had thirst, he had the lust for the sweet limbs, right? That's what led to her downfall. And look what's happening to Baucis and Philemon now. They're also dying because of his greed, basically. That's all it is. He's greedy. He wants everything. The last piece of land, he wants it, you know? So he hasn't improved at all. But the only constant is his striving, you know? That has been the only constant, and that redeems him. His striving redeems him. So that's all. I think he's improved morally.
Right. Anybody else has a different opinion? Are we all too hard on?
I'd say also that it ending the entire play on a Christian note does bookend the very beginning of the whole thing. Although actually not entirely, because we never exit via the business manager and the clown and the poet who are putting on the play. So we actually don't entirely leave the world. If you were really going to make it a mirror image at the end, he would have ended with that. But instead, he ended one layer in with heaven. Right.
Yeah, it's not a perfect mirror image. It is, and of course, we don't have any kind of epilogue, right? Kind of like we had the prologue, where Goethe, the artist, is speaking to us, the audience. We don't have any of that, so we really do end up with something different. And but the ending is very profound and I would say mysterious to interpret. And maybe we can go there next, or not. Depend if you guys want to turn to it. Let's turn to the ending. And let's read the last. This is the chorus mystic. Excuse me. Chorus mysticus. My translation says, all that is changeable is but reflected. The unattainable here is affected. Human discernment here is passed by. The eternal feminine draws us on high. So this eternal feminine is, again, to me, what a mysterious, interesting word. In German, it's one word, I believe. And I even have it written down somewhere. I don't know if I can pronounce it correctly, but it's something like ewig weibliche. Maybe Katie can correct me. But the forever female, the eternal female. And we have a similar word, the eternal nothing, that Mephistopheles references a few passages earlier when he looks at Faust and says, "Oh, everything is done, but what is over? What is done? Nothing was there in the first place." I don't like this word done. I don't like this word over, because there was nothing to begin with. You know, this whole thing is nothing but appearances. So I prefer the eternal nothing. That's Mephistopheles. But Goethe ends not with eternal nothing, but eternal female. And again, we've talked about this quest for the female form, or just the quest for the female as a kind of the red line that runs through the entire tragedy, the entire play. And the ending is nothing short of mysterious and profound in that same sense, that we end up with this eternal feminine. So what was this whole thing about? Is the eternal feminine the key to somehow finding satisfaction? What does it even mean? I mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about Mary? Are we talking about the Godhead? Are we talking about some abstract principle of beauty, you know, the beatific vision that is female in its essence versus male, kind of the idea of maybe striving again is the male idea, and the female is more contemplative. Very interesting thoughts, I think, to ponder. Dimitri, go ahead.
Yes, well, I believe the eternal feminine, right? I think it harks back to that transcendent quest for the idea, for the abstract ideal of beauty, which ended at some point in the tragedy. That quest for the ideal of beauty. Remember, there was a vision of Helena, which represented the abstract ideal of beauty, and then that quest was over, and here it comes back. You know, somehow from the depths it comes back. You know, but I think here there is a double meaning. You know, not only does it come back, it also talks about the source of all poetry, but this is a poem. What is the source of all poetry? It's the muse. What is the muse? The muse is always feminine, right? So it has a double meaning. The first meaning is that regeneration of the search for the abstract ideal of beauty, and the second meaning is who ultimately gave rise to this poetry, to this poem, to Faust itself, the poetry itself, the whole tragedy, the muse, and the muse is always feminine. What I'm saying, there is a double meaning. You know?
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. Thank you. Anyone else has any thoughts on the? I want to ask the women. You know, here we are mansplaining this. Madeline, Katie, do you guys have a thought on this? Please enlighten us if you do.
Well, I think that the muse is always feminine if you're a man. Although it may actually be genderless, and you just experience it as female because it feels like something that is other than you in some fundamental way, the muse. So I'm going with this as being the other half of the soul, the part that's forgiving and not striving and all of that. It would be very interesting if someone who is most definitely not me wanted to rewrite this whole thing with Faust as a woman. I'm not even sure how that could be done, considering the pregnancy of Gretchen, but it's not totally impossible. And what it would look like to have all the genders reversed.
Right. That's
I
a
know
very interesting idea, Madeline. I think you should take it up.
Yeah, I don't have time. I know that the ancient Greeks, the idea was that for an artist, like say for Goethe, let's say, he wasn't going to be possessed directly by a god in a frenzy in order to do the writing. Like say, if you were an artist in ancient Greece, a lot of this takes place in that world. So that's why I'm referring to it. You were going to be basically possessed by a muse And the muse was possessed by a god, was in a sort of frenzy. So you had a sort of intermediary channeler between you and the god. And so I think that here, his intermediary, at least at the end, is Gretchen. She's sort of his divine other and very forgiving. As I said, he was a real shit. And, in real life, it's very difficult to imagine Gretchen saying, "Oh, darling, darling, here you are at last."
But
She might be more likely to be saying, "Oh, no, I thought you were going to go with Mephistopheles. I'd never have to deal with you again."
well,
But apparently her conventionality and sort of general church girlness is what made her this forgiving, maybe.
well, for sure. I mean, that's definitely part of it. Remember, she herself is redeemed. So she is definitely part of that worldview, that medieval worldview, in a sense, that Faust is destroying or set on destroying. And that brings up to me the most, I guess, the most salient point is how can they coexist when he is obviously set on this limitless trajectory that explodes any kind of medieval mindset of having, absolute morals and absolute limitations like that. Everything about religion is about limitations. I mean, that's the kind of the whole point of it. And these limitations are supposed to be transcendent, so that there is no utilitarian need that would justify breaking it, because those things are more, or at least presented as more important than whatever means are, or whatever ends are pursued. But with Faust, the means absolutely justify the ends. So by any means possible, right? If we need to, we talked last time, I think, Madeline, you brought up the point in England, what happened to the farmers with the Industrial Revolution, and the fact that livelihoods were destroyed. And did anybody really blink an eye at that? Of course not. I mean, it just had to happen. Somebody decided that was the right thing to do, and that's it. People were moved off of their land. They lost their lands, they lost their livelihoods, etc. So that is a very practical type of thing. And so it's interesting to me, like I said, that Gretchen is somehow accepting Faust, where he hasn't really expressed any kind of remorse for his programs. I mean, he when we meet him last, the last words that we have from him are the words of, "Great, I've achieved my crown. Here's my crowning achievement. I've given other people free land and all this other greatness, etc." But there's nothing at all about any kind of remorse, anything like that. So, what do you guys think about Dr. Marianus as a counterpoint to Faust, as the mirror image of what Faust should have been and could have been, but wasn't? Dr. Marianus is supposed to be, according to my notes, interpretive notes in my translation, he's supposed to be this figure that's somewhat like Bernard of Clairvaux. And of course, he mimics Bernard of Clairvaux in Dante's exposition. So in Dante Paradiso, Canto 33 in Paradiso, we have Bernard of Clairvaux interceding to Virgin Mary. And of course, this is the same exact intercession that we see in here towards the end in Faust. And he is supposed, Dr. Marianus is supposed to be this highest level of both scholarship and mysticism that a person can attain to. And in some ways, he is representative of kind of this perfect union of knowledge, of devotion, and I guess devotion and knowledge would be kind of the unity that Faust never really even looked for, but it never achieved. But Dr. Marianus, he represents that. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on him as a figure here towards the end. Is he even a realistic person? I mean, is he a realistic figure in the modern context, or is this sort of like, again, a kind of like a vestigial leftover dinosaur, if you will, that's about to go extinct in the modern age? Madeline, go ahead.
Well, his name does suggest a male form of the name Mary,
Mm-hmm.
Latinized as they often did in Scandinavia, like Linnaeus, for
Mm-hmm.
example. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, most of my knowledge of Christian theology comes from Dante, so I'm not really the person to ask about anything else, but I did notice the thing about his name.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Katie, you mentioned in the chat about Sophia as a possible explanation of the eternal feminine. Do you want to elaborate at all on that?
Well, my only understanding of her is that she's the kind of represents wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty limited, but that was my kind of. I agree with you guys on your the idea of beauty as well. I agree with that on too. There'd be both wisdom and beauty.
Yeah, I also don't know much about Sophia. I know that in Proverbs in the Bible, wisdom is personified, and the Hebrew word for it is chokhmah. And then towards the time of Jesus, there was this idea of this either emanation from God or some kind of even personified angel from God that was Sophia, the wisdom. Of course, that went with the Gnosticism. Gnostics were all about hidden knowledge, and Sophia would be this representation of this hidden knowledge and would be part of this hidden sort of revelation that you could attain through particular study and following the different rituals and so on. Madeline, do you want to comment on that?
Well, speaking of women who appear in this last act, we do have these three biblical women who just sort of pop in from nowhere. But I guess a lot of characters are just popping in from nowhere.
Yep.
And they're certainly holy. I looked them all up. They're quite the counterpoint to the three mighty men who were in the last act. The ones who were, I forget what their names were, but it was like, grab it, hold it, seize it, loot it,
Right. Yep.
But again, we have the theme of threes. Which is a very old number in Northern Europe, and also there was the big theme of the threes in ancient Greece. And it's interesting what a counterpart these three women are to the three mighty men. And I think he probably did that on purpose.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's an interesting counterpoint. And they have very different functions. The three mighty men are there to serve Faust's wishes, basically. But the three women that are presented, they don't really take orders from Faust. They take orders from a higher being, right, from God. But what they do is actually in Faust's best interests. So they're all interceding initially for Gretchen, and then Gretchen in turn is interceding for Faust. Again, this is so reminiscent of what Dante is doing in his description of the of heaven. How in heaven the idea is everybody is reflecting love, and everybody's like a mirror, and everybody's love and kindness is reflected and multiplied, and therefore everybody's interceding for everybody, and it's like this beautiful kind of like a rose with petals, and everybody's blooming together, basically. So that picture is very much reminiscent of Dante and his picture of the Paradiso. So yeah, it's an interesting observation. The counterpoint there with the three mighty men.
Beatrice, did she have people intercede for her so she could then intercede for Dante?
Good point. I don't remember off the top of my head. I remember there were other women there as well who were close to Mary.
Oh, there were lots of women. There were angels with different colors.
Yeah,
They were drawing the chariots.
I'm trying to remember towards the beginning though, in Inferno, when the whole thing is set up, if Virgil mentions, I think he might have mentioned Rachel, or someone else who might have interceded for Beatrice, or at least helped Beatrice to kind of organize this rescue party for Dante. But I don't remember. I'll have to look it up. That's an interesting question, though, Madeline. Thank you. Katie put in chat, competing to be nice without the competitiveness. Yes, that's that. You know, it's a great picture. You know, if we can make it a reality somewhere, invite me. All right. Any other points on any of this? Oh yeah, so this is what I guess I wanted to read another line just before. So this is really close to the end. This is the last passage by Dr. Marianus. These are lines around 12,096. So Dr. Marianus says, "Gaze to meet the saving gaze, contrite all intender, for a blissful fate your ways thankfully surrender." And then he talks about the Queen, the Virgin Mother Mary. So the line that I thought was the most interesting is this idea of gazing to meet the saving gaze. Both this idea of gazing is the idea of glimpsing. This, you know, this is Blick as a noun and a verb. And again, Faust has been on this journey for this perfect Augenblick, right? The glimpse of the moment, the perfect moment of there's Joe. The perfect moment of this, ultimate experience, right? And here, Dr. Marianus is giving us this recipe for, again, for experiencing that. And what is this? It's gazing to meet the saving gaze. It's contemplating the divine, essentially, is what he's saying. So as you contemplate the divine, you get to experience the ultimate. Again, it's so interesting that in all of our ups and downs, going, through heaven and hell and everywhere in between, we end up in the same place where Dante ends up almost 500 years ago, right? I mean, it's just so counterintuitive in a sense that Goethe takes us through this wild journey only to end up essentially at the same place where we end up in Paradiso, Canto 33, contemplating the divine, looking at the divine. And then Joe, you just joined us a little bit later, but we were talking about the very last line there, which is the eternal feminine, which again, to me is so mysterious that Goethe would end up there with the eternal feminine as this kind of key to everything. I mean, it's just, yeah.
It's been a theme throughout, though.
It has been throughout, but not so explicitly.
That's
The word is actually, and I have it somewhere written it out. I'll just go back to it. It's ewig weibliche, eternal, the eternal female. And the opposite of that is the eternal nothing. That's what Mephistopheles is. Remember, Mephistopheles from the beginning is presented to us as the spirit of kind of the antagonism, right? The antagonism to whatever is there. He doesn't care what it is. He wants to destroy it. So he's kind of like the spirit of nothingness, the void. And perhaps that's why he derides Faust at every point. He doesn't see meaning in anything. To him, everything is meaningless. But where we end up is with this eternal female as maybe the key to meaning and to satisfaction, which again is so interesting. Another point that I thought I'd make along the way is we don't see Helen anywhere. So Helen was there kind of central throughout part 2, and then she disappears and we never hear from her again. And the person we meet is not Helen, as far as heaven is concerned. We meet Gretchen. So it turns out that you don't need this perfect ideal. What you need is an actual person who is redeemed. Or at least that's the implication there to me. I don't know, I'm not sure if this is more of my interpretation of what you think, but to me it's significant that Helen is not in heaven, and that Gretchen is. Dimitri, do you have any thoughts on that? You're muted, Dimitri.
Well, regarding your last comment about Helen, I mean, after all, she's an abstraction. She's an abstract ideal of beauty, so she cannot be in heaven. She's a pure abstraction. That's my idea of Helen. Gretchen should be there because she was a real concrete person.
Okay,
But-
you mean abstraction, not obstruction like obstructing of justice.
No, I mean abstraction. I mean abstract ideal of
Abstract,
beauty.
yeah, abstract. Okay.
Abstraction.
I didn't know if you
Not-
meant
not
like to
abstract.
be another woman. So you have Gretchen, you don't want Helen there at the same time.
Yeah. But you know what I mean, right? So and also that is about her, and also regarding the last lines of the chorus mysticus, right? All that is changeable is but reflected. What is all that is changeable? Here it's the chorus seems to be talking about some kind of permanence, the ideal Platonic form,
Mhm.
So it's kind of a reference to Plato, to something unchangeable, to something permanent, and that form is the eternal feminine, Why it's feminine? Well, I think I already discussed it, but it seems to be it's a reference to Plato, in some sense, about to eternal Platonic forms.
Yeah, I agree.
Platonic forms, they're eternal.
Yeah.
And here why they don't have to be necessarily feminine, but they are eternal.
Mhm.
So, and they are unchangeable. And he says, all that is changeable is but and they are unchangeable. They're permanent. They have permanence about them.
Mm.
So that's my interpretation of what it says here.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I think I got something similar to that, Dimitri, when I was reading it. I also thought
Yes.
of maybe I wasn't thinking explicitly about Plato, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It's very
Well,
cool.
not absolutely, but I'm saying that I'm still a little confused why that eternal has to be feminine and not masculine, but that I'm not sure. But
Right.
that's Goethe.
Well, when Madeline rewrites the tragedy from reversing all the genders, then we'll end up with an eternal masculine. Madeline, go ahead.
All right, I better get to work.
Yeah.
I had noticed that what I think of as Mephistopheles' nihilism speech. The part where he says, I can't see well enough the little numbers, but that's stupid, overdone. What's been and what has never been, they're one. The same. What point is there in all of this creating when back created things are dragged to nothing? It's overdone, really. What does that mean? It seems it just as well might not have been. Yet round and round it goes, creation as if real. For me, the eternally nothing has more appeal. So in a sense, they're talking about the same thing as in the very final passage, except that what Mephistopheles sees beyond all the transitoriness is nothingness, whereas there is ultimate fullness from the point of view of heaven. I think the reason that Helen isn't in heaven and all of those other people aren't in heaven is because they're not part of that whole religious system. They're part of a whole different religious system. Remember in Greece, in the classical world, which was certainly very religious, there was a lot going on. They were interacting with gods all the time. Mephistopheles, his powers were different. They didn't recognize him for who he was in the way that people and spirits up north did. You know, at one point, didn't they mock him? They're like, oh, you're just this kind of lame spirit with goat hoofs. You know, you're no big deal at all. So there, Goethe seemed to be saying these are just two entirely different systems. And so it kind of makes sense that no one from, I'll call the Greek system A, just because it's older, so that no one from system A appears in system B at the end. Although we see people from system B appear in system A in other parts throughout.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. I have one other point that I wanted to make. And this is, again, jumping around a little bit, but going back to one of these mystical fathers that are presented, and we have three of them. We have Pater Profundus, Pater Seraphicus, and what's the other Pater that we have? We have three of them. But anyway, the Pater Profundus, where he makes his pronouncement, it's all about nature. And it's all about that everything in nature really is a reflection. Also, it's also kind of Platonic in a way. But more specifically, he talks about how everything in nature and the growth and the forms and how they change and so on is affected through love, divine love. That's the source of everything in nature. And of course, this echoes very strongly with some of the previous portions, specifically the classical Walpurgis Night, where we had Nereus and Galatea, and of course we had Homunculus, who is again searching for this expression, right, of himself, and wants to become real and concrete and so on, but is not able to do so apart from becoming one with nature, this specifically with the ocean, which is kind of the source of life. So anyway, I'm just curious if you have any comments, or if anybody thought this was interesting, that we are kind of tying all of these loose ends towards the end with bringing it all back to divine as being the source of nature and kind of everything around nature. And also, obviously, going back to part one, if you remember, one of the places where Faust was looking for meaning was in the earth spirit. And this, and this was the spirit of nature and kind of this romantic ideal of returning to nature. And now Goethe is bringing that also under this kind of guiding principle of the divine. So basically everything is brought back to the divine, almost in the same way as Dante did it, right? Dante brought back the classical mythology under kind of the Christian dispensation, I guess, following Thomas Aquinas. And Goethe is doing basically the same thing in my mind. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that. Or any other comments?
As far as reconnecting to nature, my one comment is that it seems like Faust will only be satisfied if he can conquer nature, and that's actually conquering the divine. And so from that perspective, I think that there's an overarching theme that how nature is the divine, and that how essentially Faust wants to be God. I mean,
Mhm.
that's essentially, that's what I get out of the whole, the whole play, is that essentially, and you could kind of sense that in the beginning passages. So, he wants to control nature.
Right.
And so, every last bit of it too. It's not just, every part of it that even the parts, like the very few parts that he doesn't own. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, and that he won't be satisfied until that happens, until that happened. And, so that's yeah. And I think that in a way, that says a lot about what Goethe is saying about the importance of nature, in general, as far as its divinity.
Right. Right. No, that's very, yeah, I agree. I think I agree with that. Go ahead, Dmitry.
Yes, regarding Joseph's point about nature, when we and homunculus, remember with homunculus, there was some kind of contrast between the natural random forces producing something and human hands producing something. And nature has triumphed. Nature always produced something more permanent. And homunculus ultimately shattered it and broke. You remember, I think we had a disagreement whether what the meaning of that was, that ultimately he shattered it. My point was that he shattered it because he was produced by not by nature but human effort. That nature produces something, the true nature which represents true divinity, producing something permanent, while human hands can only produce something perishable, which can easily break. So that was my interpretation regarding that moment.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you go back to homunculus too, Dimitri, because I wanted to bring a homunculus as I want to put homunculus side by side with these blessed infants, blessed boys, they're called in here in my translation. But these are really infants because they were just born and they died, and so they go to heaven. But they're not developed in any sort of way. In fact, they're compared to pupa by Goethe. Which again, Goethe is all about, Goethe invented morphology, right? He is the father of morphology in terms of biological systems. So he compares them to pupa, undeveloped, organisms, but they have the potential in them to develop. And these blessed boys, they are also very interested they haven't experienced the world as we do, but now they're in heaven and they want to experience heaven. Yes, Madeline, thank you. So yeah, and homunculus in a similar fashion was kind of this blank slate, right? He was created in a retort, didn't have experience of real world, but wanted to, had the potential of that, and then he breaks and he perishes. But the blessed boys do not perish. They basically start on this, going up the rungs of the ladder to get closer to the divine, to get this saving gaze, right? That will propel them higher. So anyhow, to me, they were kind of similar, very similar concepts. The blessed boys, which again come out of nowhere, and homunculus perhaps are the two counterpoints. And then with that, if you continue with that theme, then Pater Profundus, who talks about this nature and divine, to me is similar to Nereus, who is, again, in the classical Walpurgis Night, he is this figure who praises the energy of the ocean and the eros, the love force that powers it all, right? That's the kind of the setup there. So anyway, just some interesting observations on that. Anybody else has any comments on any of these themes? All right. Well, we're getting close to time. So unless you guys have any other thoughts, questions, comments, we're gonna wind down today. We're gonna have another. Sorry, did anybody want to say something?
Well, I can
Go
add
ahead, Mike.
that Napoleon Hill wrote a book called Outwitting the Devil. Mephistopheles, Goethe outwitted the devil, although barely. Faust outwitted the devil, although barely. And Napoleon Hill outwitted the devil just marginally. There's a fine line between success and failure.
But okay, well, that's a great point. So did he outwit the devil?
No,
Okay, Joe, can you expand?
Which one did Faust outwit the devil? You're saying that Faust did not outwit the devil?
Well, he was saved eventually, but was it his own wits that got him
no,
there?
it wasn't his own wits. He was saved by Gretchen. Couldn't have banked on that.
Well,
Right.
he saved Gretchen.
He saved Gretchen, you think, Mike?
I think Gretchen was his love for Gretchen saved her, and they saved each other. Gretchen is Margaret in the play, and Margaret is Helen of Troy, and that's a complicated story. No,
Okay, that's an interesting interpretation. I have not thought of it that way, to be honest. But that's definitely something to think about if they saved each other through their love. I mean, that's a very Hollywood-like plot there, them saving each other through love. I'm not opposed to it. It's an interesting.
the angels who came, I think, at least to me, the angels who visited Faust on his deathbed explained that to him, or at least to me.
Yeah, and I'll give Madeline a chance to say something as well about this in a second. Yeah, I think that it's twofold, and I don't know if Mike, if you joined us when we were discussing this. It seems that the cause of Faust's salvation is a two-pronged. There's a two-pronged explanation, two-part explanation. One is it's because of his striving that he is saved, and it echoes with the initial statement of by God in the very beginning that as long as man strives, he errs, but if he just keeps striving, I will guide him to me. And that Faust was striving to the very end. The second part, though, is this intercession by Gretchen that saves him, and her love is what saves him. So that's a part two. Now, how much each part plays into it is an open question, but I'm not sure that. I guess Faust did save himself through that striving, if you take that kind of first part seriously. Although he did cease to strive. That's the paradox to me. He did the reason he died in the first place was because he said, okay, that's it. I found the crowning moment, so I don't need to strive anymore. And he lost the bet. He lost the wager at that point. So the only other thing that could redeem him would be intercession by Gretchen. I think that's really the main point. This idea of redemption that overrides, essentially it's an override of his failure to keep striving all his life. Madeline, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So what I originally raised my hand for was just to say, I have been very interested in how Goethe was using the theory of forms. And I found a paper on Goethe's use of theory of forms. So I'm going to read it before the final session, and I'll try to report in on it. As far as outwitting the devil goes, this isn't even a story about outwitting the devil. The devil did not trick Faust into making a bargain with him. Faust is not trying to get out of the bargain. First, Mephistopheles proposes a bargain, a bet with God. Then Faust proposes a bargain with Mephistopheles. So in both cases, it's the person who sort of stands to lose the most, in a sense, who is actually proposing the wager. And at the end, it is God who welshes on the bet. He's supposed to let Mephistopheles take Faust's soul if Faust achieves this moment where he thinks, I'm completely happy, there's nothing else I want. And he has that moment, he drops dead. This is Mephistopheles' chance. First, we have Mephistopheles hanging around, bitching and moaning, saying, it used to be so simple. Someone died, they were dead, you could take their soul. Now, I guess in the era of modern science with Galvani and everyone, we have the corpse twitching, I think a reference to Frankenstein. We never are quite sure when someone's completely dead and we have to hang around and blah, blah, blah. But basically in the end, God just welshes on the bet. He takes Faust anyway. So no one was tricked
Except
into
Mephistopheles.
making a bet. He was cheated out of his end of the bargain,
Yep.
but no one was tricked into making a bargain.
Correct.
They proposed the bargains.
Yep, I think that's how I see it too, Mike. I feel like it's more of a, yeah, if anybody got cheated, it was Mephistopheles, and if there was any outwitting going on, I think it was more on the divine side of things than the Faustian side. But that's definitely something to think about.
But I mean, I said this before, but I never really thought that there was anything for Faust to lose.
Except his soul?
No, he was going to kill himself. I mean, he was going to technically lose his soul anyway.
Right.
So what's the real gamble here? He
Mhm.
just had one last ride. So I never saw it as a risk to Faust. I always saw it as a risk to God, because this is God's ideal, that you can't get this guy to, have you met Faust?
Right.
And can you get him to basically turn,
Right.
and so, and essentially, yeah, if God had lost that, could you imagine what God had lost? He created man.
Yeah.
I mean, so that, can you imagine that's like the thing that you've created is now corrupted.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that is, so God always had in a way, I think God was always going to welch on the bet.
I was thinking of another story, even more wild, about in this exact kind of setting. If you remember this or not, this is in Dante. We have, I think it's Emperor Trajan, who of course dies before. Was it Trajan or it's another emperor? Maybe it was Trajan. But anyway, he dies and goes to hell, and then Pope Gregory, or one of the popes, intercedes for him years and years later, centuries later. And he is whisked out of hell because of Pope Gregory or something like that, intercession. And of course, this is even a greater cheat in a sense. And yeah. So yeah, God never loses.
No, that's actually a great example, especially when you're talking about like the Pope being God in this particular.
God never loses and the devil never loses, but Mephistopheles could have ended up in hell, but because he outwitted the devil, he ended up in heaven. And there's a little bit of the prodigal son in here. There's a little bit of the story of Job in here. For me, it's all there. A flight of fancy. And Gretchen is Helen of Troy.
Gretchen is Helen of Troy.
I didn't get that.
Okay, well, that's another big leap of faith. I'll yield the balance of my time.
What flights of
I wanted to go back to what Joe was saying, because I had forgotten about that Faust was lost already. He was going to commit suicide. And so this was his sort of last ditch thing to find something in the world that might make him want to be here. And he just even wants that one moment. And so I guess God always stood to win in that sense. So Joe, thank you.
For
Interesting.
articulating it.
Yeah, this is fascinating, right? Because now we're kind of debating the terms of the
Of the
pact.
deal.
Yeah, yeah. Even though they seem pretty straightforward initially, but now that we know the pact is broken, or we think it's broken, we have to go back to the contract and re-examine it again. With that, I'm gonna probably I just mentioned that we're gonna have another meetup on this to sort of do an overview of the entire play from the beginning to the end, just kind of a bird's eye view now that we've read it. And again, try to identify these major themes and major lessons that come out of it. And I think it'll be an interesting evening to discuss all of this. So for next time, no, there's no more reading. Just yeah, if you have a paper there, Madeline, maybe you can share the link so we can also read up on that. And then yeah, I just encourage you to go back to the passages that were most meaningful, and then we can sort of tease out some of those most salient lessons from the play. I think it'll be very, very enjoyable and productive to do that. Congratulations, we've made it to the end of part 2. We've gone where 99% of the people have not gone, so we're the elite group here. No, seriously, it's an accomplishment to stay with it. It's not an easy work to go through, and there's so much there that warrants, study and careful thinking and examination. So anyway, I think everybody deserves a pat on the back for sticking with it. Okay, so look forward to meeting you all next time. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Madeline. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks. It beats the Super Bowl anyway.
That's right. That's right. Thanks, Mike.
You haven't seen it yet, Mike. It could be, it might not beat it.
I'm on all sides of the Super Bowl this